Hello everyone. My name is Katja Žibrek, and I'm going to present a study where we were interested in the effects of gender and attractiveness of motion on proximity in virtual reality. Our main interest in this study is the behavior that people exhibit when they interact with others, also known as personal space. The pioneer in this field of study was the anthropologist Edmund T. Hall, who noted that people keep specific distances between each other, and any breach into the personal space will arouse the feelings of discomfort. Proximity is the minimum comfort distance, which changes depending on familiarity and other factors like age, status, emotion, gender, and even attractiveness of the other person. Studies from sociology showed that proximity is affected by gender of people in interaction. It was found that females in general prefer further distances to others than males. Females will keep even a further distance if the person who approaches them is male, and they'll be more comfortable when the approaching person is female. So different combinations of the gender dyads will result in different proximities. It's important to note that studies conducted in real-life interactions gave inconclusive results. Some found male to male are the furthest distances, and others reported female to male to be the furthest proximity distances. The reasons behind this is perhaps the poor control over the factors when conducting experiments in real situations. Virtual reality gives the opportunity to study social behavior in a highly controlled environment. One such study in virtual reality confirmed the aspect that females keep further away in general and even further away to male virtual confederates. This study was conducted in a cave where people were approached by male and female virtual characters. While a study in virtual reality enables a higher level of control, there could be other factors influencing the results. Appearance attributes, which are related to gender, could play a role. For example, the person's height affects proximity, and males tend to be taller on average. People can also be more or less attractive, which will affect the proximity as well. One study found that more attractive people will be allowed closer into our personal space. But how do we control for these unwanted effects of appearance? One way of looking at it is to get the information that's coming from motion. Previous studies using point light displays found that gender can be successfully recognized from motion only. This was also found when the motion was applied on an androgynous character, in this case on a wooden mannequin. People could recognize if the motion was female or male. Motion can also be more or less attractive. One study found that by averaging motions which were captured from several actors onto one virtual character, reduces the distinctiveness of the character's motion, but also improves the perceived attractiveness of this character. In our study, we were first interested if proximity is affected by a character's gender. Our hypothesis one was that female walking motion applied to a virtual character will reduce the viewer's proximity to this character. The second interest was in the effects of participants' gender on proximity. In hypothesis 2, we proposed that female participants will choose further proximity distances to virtual characters than male participants. And lastly, we were interested if attractiveness of motions affects the proximity. Hypothesis 3 proposed that attractive motions will reduce the viewer's proximity to that character in comparison to less attractive motions. And again, we only focus on the motion of the character. In order to measure proximity in virtual reality, we used a well-established behavioral measure. People in virtual reality show similar proximity behavior as they do in real-life social situations. And there are different ways to measure proximity in virtual reality, but they could roughly be divided into passive and active approaches. Active approach is when a user is prompted to approach a character, either to complete a task, or the character is an obstacle on the way to complete a task, and the user has to avoid it. In this case, the proximity measure is the minimum approaching or avoiding distance between the character and the user. Passive approach is when the user is static and the character moves towards them. The user has to stop the approaching character when they start feeling uncomfortable, and the distance between them and the character is recorded. For our experiment design, we will follow the latter passive approach. We also recorded subjective responses in our study. We used the social presence survey containing 5 items. We asked a question about place illusion, so if people had the sensation of being in an actual real place. And we used 2 items for sense of embodiment. And all these questionnaires could be rated on a Likert scale ranging from 1 to 7. We used motion capture data of 10 male and 10 female walking motions and applied them to an androgynous wooden mannequin model in an environment built in Unreal Engine 4. We recruited 20 participants, 10 males and 10 females, and by using Vive, embodied them in a virtual reality environment. The embodiment was a simple IK skeleton driven by the Vive controllers. The body they saw was exactly the same as the observed character, the wooden mannequin. Participants were presented with 3 tasks. In the first task, we recorded proximity. In the second, we were interested how well gender can be recognized from motion. And for the last, we presented an attractiveness rating scale. In the first task, participants were asked to indicate, by pulling the trigger, precisely the time when the distance between them and the virtual characters made them feel uncomfortable. They saw a randomized order of male and female walks with 3 repetitions for each motion. In the gender recognition tasks, participants need to indicate if the motion they see is male or female by pressing left trigger for male or right trigger for female. The last task was attractiveness of rating, where participants were deciding on a scale from 1 to 7 how attractive they found the motion of the character. And here are some examples of these ratings. Some motions which were highly recognized by gender, and some which were poorly recognized. And here are some examples of attractiveness ratings. Some motions which were considered attractive, and some that were perceived less attractive. The statistical analysis showed that, as expected, females indicated earlier than males when the distance between them and the character was uncomfortable. On average, females chose 164 centimeters as the critical distance and males around 92 centimeters. The difference in proximity between female and male participants was significant. However, unexpectedly, we found no evidence that the gender of agent makes a difference on proximity. This is not aligned with the previous reports on gender effects in virtual reality or the reports from real life. We found that overall gender was well recognized, but there were some actors which had a lower recognition rating. When we removed these actors that were below 75% of the recognition rate, and we reanalyzed the data for proximity, we didn't find any change in the proximity results. So a poorer gender recognition could not have affected the results of proximity. We also found that proximity is affected by the perceived attractiveness of the character's motion. We found a significant negative correlation between the attractiveness ratings and proximity. Higher attractiveness results in smaller proximity distances. We also wanted to ensure that participants felt immersed in the virtual environment, and we asked for their level of place illusion. This seemed to be the case for place illusion, while body ownership was significantly lower than movement ownership, indicating that participants had a higher feeling of agency, but did not feel that the body is their own. This is perhaps due to the unrealistic appearance of the virtual body. We also found social presence was mid-range and different according to participant gender. Females reported higher social presence than males. The gender of the motion did not affect the viewer's proximity in our study. This begs the question, were previous studies more influenced by other visual cues and not gender per se? And perhaps motion is not a strong indicator of proximity response. Female participants chose further proximity distances to virtual characters than male participants, and this is in line with previous studies. But we also found that the social presence was higher for females. Since a higher social presence is known to increase proximity, our results could have been due to this social presence factor and not gender. Future studies need to be conducted to establish this connection. We also found and confirmed that attractive motions affect the viewer's proximity. This is a novel result, since the association between the attractiveness of motion and proximity hasn't been shown before. There are also some limitations to our study. Our sample size was relatively small. We also used a binary gender categorization, which could have been too reductive. There could also be other information in motion which affected our results, for example, the personality of the walker. Future work is needed to control for these effects. To conclude, motion is a strong perceptual cue, and gender as well as attractiveness of the characters will regulate proximity behavior. This is important when we simulate crowds, when we want to create a naturalness of motion and naturalness of interaction between virtual agents. We can use our results to design better spaces for virtual interaction in shared virtual reality. For example, if we know that females prefer larger distances, we could organize the virtual space according to the gender needs. We can also use these results in general in character design for game development or animation. In our future work, we will apply the motion on male and female models to investigate whether the addition of appearance would result in differences in the proximity depending on the character gender. This was a result which we anticipated but didn't find in the current experiment. Thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask.